In the Colorado mountains, a snowstorm turned every road into a white silence. Former Navy SEAL Dash Marrow thought he was only answering another rescue call. Then his headlights found a nurse pushing a dead medical van away from a blind curve. She was carrying a red bag of medicine for elderly patients no one else could reach. Under an abandoned medical truck, a half-frozen German shepherd was still waiting to be seen. That night, one nurse, one broken man, and one forgotten dog would uncover the truth hidden behind clean records. Stay with this story, tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and bring more stories like this to life. Winter did not fall on Briar Pass. It occupied it. Snow covered the roofs of the mountain town in quiet white layers, softened the sharp lines of the cabins, buried the old fences, and turned every road into a question. By daylight, the Colorado mountains looked almost merciful, blue shadows resting gently beneath the pines, sunlight glittering on drifts as if the earth had been dusted with broken glass. But after dark, when the wind came down from the high ridges, the same beauty grew teeth. Dash Marrow knew those teeth well. At 51, Dash had the kind of body that still remembered orders even when the man had stopped giving them. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, solid in the chest, and built less like a young fighter than like something weather had failed to wear down. His dark brown hair, threaded with gray at the temples, was just long enough for the wind to worry at it whenever he stepped outside. A short, rough beard shadowed his jaw. His eyes, gray-blue and watchful, rarely gave away what his hands had already decided to do. Most nights he wore the same plain army green T-shirt under a heavy rescue jacket, the fabric tight across the strength he never showed off. On his right arm, half hidden unless he rolled up a sleeve, an old Navy SEAL tattoo had faded into his skin like a promise left too long in the sun. Around his neck hung 2 military dog tags. One was his, the other he never explained. The people in town knew him as the man to call when an engine froze, when a truck slid sideways into a ditch, when a tourist from Denver mistook confidence for traction. He drove a yellow mountain recovery rig with steel cables, floodlights, tire chains, and a heater that worked only when it felt spiritually encouraged. He could pull a pickup away from a cliff edge without raising his voice. He could listen to a panicked driver talk for 3 minutes straight and somehow make them breathe slower by saying only, "Stay put." "I'm coming." That was what people knew. They did not know that Dash chose the worst shifts on purpose. They did not know he signed up for storm nights the way another man might sign a confession. Years earlier, before the mountain roads and tow hooks and coffee that tasted like punished mud, Dash had been Lieutenant Marrow. He had led men into places the world preferred not to imagine before breakfast. He had made decisions under pressure. He had brought some men home, not all. The photograph in his wallet was creased from years of being opened and shut. 5 SEALs stood shoulder to shoulder beneath a hard foreign sun, dust on their boots, grins on their faces as if youth itself were armor. Beside Dash stood Caleb Vance, his closest friend, laughing at something outside the frame. Caleb had possessed the kind of grin that made trouble seem temporary. Even in a place where the air tasted like metal and sand, Caleb had looked as if he expected the day to end with a joke. It had not. The report said Dash had made the correct call. The reviews cleared him. The men who survived told him, in different ways, that he had done what the moment demanded. But grief was not a courtroom. It did not care about findings, signatures, or proper procedure. It returned at odd hours. It sat beside him in the cab of the rescue truck. It waited in the pause after the radio went silent. It whispered that Caleb's laughter had stopped so Dash could grow older. So Dash grew older carefully, almost reluctantly. He refused security contracts. He ignored polite offers from men who wanted him to train teams, advise departments, or stand in conference rooms speaking about leadership beneath fluorescent lights. He wanted no stage, No applause, no second career built from stories that ended with another man's name carved in stone. Instead, he stayed near Briar Pass. He drove into storms. On the night everything changed, the snow had been falling since late afternoon. By 10, the plows were losing their argument with the mountain. By 11, dispatch was short, the sheriff's office was overwhelmed, and half the county sounded like it was being shaken inside a tin cup. Dash sat in the cab of his recovery rig outside the closed service station, gloved hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm. The town below him shimmered faintly through the snow, soft squares of yellow light tucked into the dark. For a moment, it almost looked peaceful. The radio crackled. "Dash, you awake?" He looked at the microphone clipped to the dash. "That question insulted both of us, Lorna." The dispatcher, Lorna Bell, had smoked for 30 years, quit for 2, and still sounded disappointed in everyone. "Got a call near Briar Pass, East Bend. Medical van stalled. Driver reports blocked lane, poor visibility." Then the call dropped. Dash set the coffee down. "Any injuries?" "Unknown. Hospital line says one of their community nurses might be on that route, but nobody's confirming much tonight. You know how paperwork gets when the sky falls." Dash started the engine. The rig rumbled awake, a tired beast with a faithful heart. "I'm rolling," he said. "Road's ugly." "Road's always been ugly. Tonight it's just proud of itself." Lorna gave a dry little laugh. "Try not to become paperwork." "No promises." The rescue rig crawled out of the station lot, amber lights turning in slow circles, painting the snow with pulses of gold. Dash drove by memory as much as sight. Briar Pass had curves that did not forgive strangers. The wind pushed sideways hard enough to shove the truck a foot toward the shoulder, then eased off as if pretending innocence. The world narrowed to headlights, snow, and the black ribbon of road appearing a few yards at a time. Dash kept both hands steady on the wheel. He did not pray. He listened. The mountain always spoke before it struck. Snow ticking against glass, chains biting ice, the low groan of trees bending under weight. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked with a sound like an old bone snapping in a cathedral. Dash slowed before the east bend, where the road pinched between a rock wall and a drop into pine darkness. That was when he saw her. At first she was only movement in the white. A figure bent against the storm, shoulder pressed to the side of a medical van, boots sliding as she tried to push the dead vehicle farther from the curve. Her jacket flapped open over blue scrubs. One arm strained against the van. The other clutched a red medical bag to her chest as if it were a child, a shield, or the last coal from a dying fire. Dash braked. For one stunned second, he simply stared. Then he muttered, "You have got to be kidding me." He angled the recovery truck behind the van, set the warning lights, and stepped into the storm. The wind hit him like a thrown door. Snow stung his face. His boots crunched hard into the road as he moved toward her. "Ma'am," he called, "step away from the vehicle." She did not step away. She threw him one quick look over her shoulder. Her cheeks were red from cold. Snow clung to loose strands of chestnut-brown hair escaping her hat. Her eyes were dark, exhausted, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. "I'm trying to get it out of the lane," she shouted back. "This curve's blind." Dash reached the van and planted one gloved hand against the rear panel. "That's why God invented tow trucks and men with bad judgment. I called for one. You got one. Then push." Dash stared at her. Under different circumstances, he might have admired the nerve. Under these circumstances, he did admire it, which annoyed him. Together, they shoved. The van groaned, tires half-locked in packed snow. Dash gave one hard drive from his legs, and the vehicle lurched another foot toward the shoulder. The nurse slipped. He caught her elbow before she went down. She pulled away fast, not offended, just unwilling to waste time. "I'm fine." "Sure," Dash said. "That's what people say 5 seconds before becoming horizontal." She ignored that and bent to retrieve the red bag from where it had nearly slipped. Her hands were shaking, though not from fear alone. Dash looked her over quickly. Blue scrubs under a dark parka, badge clipped near her collar, snow on her lashes. A woman too young to look that tired and too determined to accept rescue as a full-time condition. The badge read, Aubrey Vale, RN. "You Aubrey Vale?" he asked. "Yes." "Dash Marrow, Mountain Recovery." "I know who you are." That surprised him. "Do you?" "You pulled Mrs. Rusk's nephew out of a ravine last January. She still talks about your truck like it was an archangel." Dash glanced at the dead van. "My truck leaks antifreeze and hates uphill starts. Tell Mrs. Rusk to lower her theology." For half a second, Aubrey's mouth almost smiled. Then the storm took it from her. "I have 3 patients left," she said. 1 heart medication delivery, 1 oxygen check, 1 welfare visit near the birch line." "No," Dash said. The word came out flat, automatic. Aubrey turned fully toward him. "Excuse me?" "No. We tow this back to town. Roads are closing. You're half frozen. This van's done. Whatever hospital you work for can send someone when the plows catch up." "I already called the hospital." "Good. And Summit Hearth Care, and the sheriff's office, and dispatch. Everyone said wait." "Then wait." Her grip tightened around the red bag. "If I wait until morning, one of those people may not have a morning." Dash looked past her at the road, at the snow erasing their tracks almost as soon as they made them. "You pushing a dead van through a whiteout is not a medical plan." "I wasn't trying to reach the next house by pushing it," she snapped. "I was moving it out of a blind curve before some family came around that bend and turned this into a very bad story." That shut him up for a moment. Aubrey breathed hard, then softened by half an inch. "I followed procedure. I called everyone I was supposed to call. The system is overloaded. Summit Hearth marked visits complete that weren't complete. My patients don't care what a screen says. They care whether someone knocks." Dash hated the way that sentence landed. Someone knocks. There were phrases that belonged to ordinary life, but in the right weather they became sacred. He looked at the red medical bag. Snow melted along its seams. It was old, scuffed, and held close to her body, like a relic carried across a battlefield no one had named. "You got meds in there that can't freeze?" he asked. "Yes." "Anyone expecting you by name?" "All 3. "You got chains?" "On a van that died before they mattered." Dash exhaled through his nose. "Of course." Aubrey lifted her chin. "You don't have to help me. But don't stand here and explain safety to me like I didn't spend the last hour trying every safe option first." The wind roared between them. Dash saw fear in her then. Not for herself. Not really. It lived around her eyes, in the way she held the bag, in the way she kept glancing toward the road beyond him. She was afraid of what might happen in a quiet house while the rest of the world congratulated itself for following policy. He knew that look. It was the look of someone standing at the edge of an order they could not obey. For a moment, Caleb's face flickered in Dash's memory, young and sunburned and laughing under a sky far from snow. Dash pushed it down the way he always did, but it didn't go as far as usual. He turned toward the van. "Pop the hood." Aubrey blinked. "You'll look at it?" "I'll look. Looking is not a promise. It's barely a hobby." She moved fast, releasing the hood latch. Dash raised it and leaned into the engine compartment with a flashlight between his teeth. The van was old, overworked, and offended by winter. He checked the battery connection, starter relay, belt, fluid lines. The cold had turned every simple fix into a negotiation with an enemy who had no sense of humor. Aubrey stood close, shielding the red bag beneath her coat. Then came the sound, a faint scraping. Dash paused. The wind swallowed it. He removed the flashlight from his mouth. "You hear that?" Aubrey went still. "Hear what?" There it was again, a tiny, desperate scratch from somewhere off the road, underneath the abandoned white medical truck half buried near the trees. Dash lowered the hood slowly. Aubrey followed his gaze. "That truck's been there for days. Something's under it." They approached carefully. Dash swept the flashlight beneath the truck's frame. 2 amber eyes looked back. Aubrey inhaled sharply. Under the rusted belly of the vehicle, pressed into a pocket of dirty snow, lay a young German shepherd. Yellow and black fur clung wet to its ribs. A dark saddle ran along its back, slightly uneven, as if painted by a tired hand. One ear stood upright. The other drooped at an angle, giving the dog a strangely wounded, questioning look. It was trembling so hard the snow around it shook. Dash crouched. "Hey there." The dog did not growl. It did not run. It only stared at him with eyes too bright for such a thin face. Aubrey knelt beside Dash, careful and quiet. "Poor thing." "Careful," Dash said. "Cold, scared dogs don't send calendar invitations before biting." "I know." But her voice had changed. All the iron in it softened into something warm and aching. She unfastened the emergency blanket from her kit and spread it open. The foil snapped in the wind like a small silver flag. Dash reached one hand under the truck, palm down, no sudden movements. "Come on, that's it." The shepherd sniffed once. Its nose touched his glove. A tiny contact. Ridiculous how small things could get past a man's armor. Dash felt the creature's breath, weak and warm against the cracked leather of his glove. The dog crawled forward, inch by inch, belly low, trembling legs folding beneath it. Aubrey eased the blanket around its back, murmuring words Dash did not catch. When they pulled it free, the dog stood for 1 second with great dignity, then immediately leaned against Dash's shin and nearly tipped over. Aubrey gave a breathless little laugh. "Very noble." Dash looked down at the soaked shepherd. "That dog weighs less than my bad decisions." "Not by much, I'm guessing." He glanced at her. This time she did smile. The dog lifted its head toward Aubrey's red medical bag and sniffed. Then it pressed closer, as if the bag itself gave off heat. Aubrey rubbed carefully behind the one good ear. "We need to call animal control," Dash said, though the sentence had very little strength behind it. "In this weather? They'll tell us to wait, too." That word's getting popular tonight. Aubrey studied the dog's face. "It needs a name." "No, it needs warmth and maybe food. Names come later." "Names help things stay." Dash looked away. He did not like that sentence either. The dog sneezed, a small, unimpressive sound, then shook its head so weakly that only one ear moved. Aubrey's smile widened despite herself. "Wisp," she said. Dash frowned. "That is not a dog name." It appeared out of the storm like a little ghost. Ghost is also a terrible dog name. "Wisp, then?" The shepherd looked up, as if the word had reached some hidden place inside it. Aubrey's expression softened. "See? It likes it." "It has hypothermia and questionable judgment. Don't flatter yourself." But when Dash opened the passenger door of the rescue truck, Wisp climbed in with awkward determination. The dog stumbled once, caught itself, and curled on the floor near the heater, nose pointed toward Aubrey's red medical bag. Not begging, guarding. Aubrey climbed in after it, still holding the bag close. Dash stood outside a moment longer, snow gathering on his shoulders. Behind him, the dead medical van sat crooked at the edge of the road. Ahead, Briar Pass vanished into white. Inside the cab, a nurse with frost-reddened hands watched him through the glass. A half-frozen German shepherd lay beside the medicine as if guarding the last ember in a dying world. Dash closed his eyes briefly. He had spent years believing the cold was what he deserved. But the mountain had just placed 3 living things in front of him: a woman who refused to abandon her patients, a dog that had survived under a forgotten truck, and a road that still had names waiting at the end of it. He opened the driver's door and climbed in. Aubrey looked at him. "Are you taking me back to town?" Dash started the engine. The yellow lights swept across the snow in slow, steady circles. "No," he said, "I'm taking you as far as I can without getting us killed." "That's not very reassuring." "It's the deluxe version." For the first time that night, Aubrey leaned back as if some small part of her had been allowed to rest. Wisp gave one tired sigh and placed its chin on the red bag. Dash put the truck in gear. The rescue rig rolled forward into the storm, carrying a man who did not believe he deserved peace, a nurse who would not let procedure bury mercy, and a young German shepherd named Wisp who seemed, in the strange wisdom of wounded animals, to know that not every rescue began with a call. Some began with a scratch beneath an abandoned truck. Some began when a man finally stopped driving past his own life. Dash kept the rescue rig in low gear and let the mountain argue with the tires. The road beyond Briar Pass did not look like a road anymore. It looked like a long white scar cut across the side of the mountain, vanishing and reappearing beneath sheets of wind-blown snow. The yellow warning lights on Dash's truck turned steadily, casting slow circles over the trees, the guardrail, the hood, and the pale reflection in Aubrey Vale's tired eyes. Wisp lay on the floor between them, wrapped in the emergency blanket like an unimpressed little king. The young German shepherd's yellow and black fur still clung wetly to his ribs, though the cab heater had begun to wake some life back into him. One ear stood up. The other stayed folded, giving him a look of permanent suspicion. Dash glanced at the dog. "He keeps staring at me." Aubrey looked down. "Maybe he's judging your bedside manner." "I don't have a bedside." "That explains a lot." Dash almost smiled, which irritated him more than the storm did. He focused on the road. "We do this my way. I choose what roads are passable. If I say we turn around, we turn around." Aubrey tightened her hold on the red medical bag in her lap. "I'll listen if you're right." "That is not the same as agreeing." "No," she said. "It's better. It means you have motivation." Dash gave her a sideways look. Aubrey Vale did not seem built for surrender. Snowmelt darkened the cuffs of her blue scrubs. Her parka was zipped crooked from haste, and loose strands of chestnut hair had escaped beneath her knit hat. She looked cold, exhausted, and stubborn enough to make a glacier move out of politeness. On the floor, Wisp lifted his head as if the argument required official supervision. Dash slowed near a fork where the main county road curved west and a narrower lane climbed toward scattered homes along the slope. He reached toward the mounted GPS, but Aubrey pointed past the windshield. "Left at the broken pine." Dash stared through the snow. "That is not a road sign." "It's better. Road signs get buried. Broken pines stay broken." Comforting local wisdom. "You asked how to get there." "I asked for a route, not woodland prophecy." "Mrs. Price lives up there." Dash looked at the dark lane, then at the snow rolling across it in long, pale ribbons. "That hill's going to be slick." "Yes? Driveway plowed?" "Probably not." "You left that out." "You looked like a man who enjoyed bad news in stages." Wisp gave a small huff from the floor. Dash muttered, "Et tu, dog?" Still, he turned left. The rescue rig climbed slowly, chains biting through packed snow. Pines crowded the lane on both sides, their branches heavy and bowed, like old witnesses leaning close to hear a secret. Beyond them, faint amber dots marked the scattered homes of people who had chosen beauty over convenience, and then spent every winter paying the bill. The house appeared after a final bend, a cream-colored cabin with a steep roof, smoke slipping from the chimney in thin, uncertain breaths. A porch light glowed weakly through the storm. Dash parked facing outward, habit stronger than thought. Aubrey was out before he finished setting the brake. "Stay behind me," Dash said. She glanced back. "Because you're armed with a tow cable?" "Because I know ice." "I know Mrs. Price." "That porch doesn't care." She paused, looked down, and noticed the steps were glazed white. For the first time since he had met her, she accepted the warning without argument. Dash went first, boots testing each step. Aubrey followed with the red bag tucked under one arm. Wisp, against all reasonable expectation, insisted on coming too. He wobbled from the truck, shook once, then marched after them with the grave dignity of a creature who had survived the underworld of a medical truck and now expected proper citizenship. Mrs. Elowyn Price opened the door before they knocked. She was small and thin, wrapped in a lavender robe and a cream cardigan, her white hair braided over one shoulder. Her face had the delicate paper lines of age, but her eyes were bright enough to make a man feel he should stand straighter. She held a cane in one hand and a flashlight in the other. "Well," she said, peering up at Dash, "you brought a mountain with you?" Aubrey stepped forward. "Mrs. Price, you shouldn't be standing in the cold." "I was standing in my own doorway before you were born, sweetheart. I expect I can manage 6 more seconds." Her gaze dropped to Wisp. "And who is this damp gentleman?" "Wisp," Aubrey said. Dash grunted. "Temporary name." Mrs. Price raised an eyebrow. Men always think names are temporary until the creature ignores all others. Wisp sneezed. Mrs. Price nodded solemnly. "Exactly." Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, old books, peppermint tea, and the faint iron warmth of a working stove. Quilts covered the back of a faded sofa. Photographs lined the mantel. A young couple in hiking clothes. A man in a miner's helmet. A Christmas group from some decade when sweaters had apparently been a public health emergency. Aubrey moved with practiced care. She washed her hands, checked Mrs. Price's medication, listened to her breathing, inspected the small bandage near her ankle, then took her blood pressure while asking about dizziness, sleep, and whether the stove had behaved itself. Dash stood near the door, feeling too large for the room. He had been in many homes where people were waiting for food, waiting for transport, waiting for news, waiting for someone with a uniform to decide whether their fear was important enough. He had forgotten how similar all waiting felt, no matter the country. It gathered in corners. It sat beside lamps. It made old people arrange medicine bottles in straight lines as if order could hold back the night. Mrs. Price noticed him looking at the mantel. "My Harold," she said, pointing toward a photograph of a broad-faced man in a wool cap. "Gone 12 years, still leaves his socks spiritually present in every drawer." Aubrey smiled while writing in her notebook. "Any chest tightness since Tuesday?" "Only when the news is on." "That's not a medical category." "It should be." Dash looked away before the warmth in the room found too many cracks in him. Aubrey gave Mrs. Price her medication, checked the stovepipe draft, and wrote a note about firewood stacked too far from the back door. The notebook she used was small and worn, its pages dense with handwriting. Not the clean emptiness of official forms. This was lived-in record-keeping, full of names and weather and small human risks. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Price reached for Aubrey's wrist. "Ruth Teller called me this afternoon," she said. "No one came to check her oxygen. The company told her someone signed off already." Aubrey went still. Dash saw it. Not surprise exactly. Confirmation. Aubrey kept her voice gentle. "I'll check the schedule." Mrs. Price's eyes sharpened. "Don't check the schedule, dear. Check the people. Schedules have learned to lie." The words settled into the room with the soft, terrible weight of snow on a weak roof. Dash looked at Aubrey. She did not look back. She closed her notebook, but her hand remained on the cover for an extra second, as though Mrs. Price had just placed something heavier than paper into her palm. Outside, the storm had thickened. Back in the truck, Aubrey was quiet. The kind of quiet that did not mean peace. It meant a mind moving fast behind closed curtains. Dash drove down from the cabin carefully. Wisp sat upright now, pressed against the heater vent, looking less like a ghost and more like a wet deputy. After a mile, Aubrey's phone rang. The screen lit her face pale blue. She stared at the name before answering. Grant. Dash did not look over, but every part of him listened. Aubrey Vale, said the voice through the speaker, polished and tight. Where are you? Aubrey took a slow breath. On the east slope, leaving Mrs. Price. You are not authorized to continue that route. Mrs. Price needed her heart medication. You were instructed to stand down. No, Aubrey said. I was instructed to wait until an overloaded system noticed people who can't wait. There was a pause. When Grant Pierce spoke again, his voice had the controlled patience of a man who believed tone was proof of virtue. You are operating a hospital vehicle outside approved conditions with medication inventory during a weather emergency, after your contracted coverage provider marked multiple visits complete. Do you understand the liability you're creating? Dash's jaw tightened. Aubrey looked out through the windshield, where snow hurled itself into the headlights and vanished. Do you understand what it means if those visits weren't complete? The system indicates they were. The system is wrong. The system is audited. Then the audit is wrong too. Another pause, colder this time. Grant said, Summit Healthcare has confirmed coverage for the region. Grant, I just left a patient who says people are being signed off without anyone knocking. That is anecdotal. That is a woman in a house with a pulse. Dash slowed before a drift, his hand steady on the wheel, but something old and bitter moved beneath his ribs. He had heard voices like Grant's before, not the same words, not the same office, but the same trick. Turn a human being into a line item, then defend the line item from the human being. Grant lowered his voice. Return to town. Bring the medication inventory back to the hospital. Do not continue. If you proceed, I will have to file a formal report. Aubrey's face went very still. For the first time, Dash saw the cost of her stubbornness. Not drama, not pride, a job, a license, a future built slowly and now balanced on a man's clean sentence. She looked down at Wisp, who had rested his chin near the red bag. The shepherd's amber eyes followed her, not understanding policy, perhaps understanding dread. Aubrey touched the worn handle of the medical bag. Then she said quietly, File what you need to file. Grant began to answer, but she ended the call. The cab filled with the sound of the heater, the chains, and the storm. Dash kept driving. Aubrey did not speak for nearly a minute. When she did, her voice had changed. It was not defiant now. It was sad. I hate that he can make doing the obvious thing feel reckless. Dash watched the road. People with warm offices are good at that. You've met a few? I've read reports written by men who weren't there. Aubrey turned slightly toward him, but she did not ask. Maybe she heard the locked door in his voice. Maybe she had enough respect not to kick it open. The truck moved through a stretch of road bordered by thick pines. Snow blew sideways across the headlights. Dash was preparing to take the next bend when Wisp suddenly stood. The change was instant. No slow stirring, no weak sniffing. The German shepherd rose on unsteady legs, one ear up, one folded, body rigid beneath the silver blanket slipping from his back. A low sound came from his chest. Not a bark, not fear. Recognition. Aubrey put a hand out. Wisp? The dog pawed at the passenger door, then looked toward the trees. He whined once, sharp and urgent. Dash slowed. "Hold him?" But Wisp pressed harder, nose to the glass, breath fogging a small circle. His entire body leaned toward the darkness beyond the road. Aubrey scanned the trees. Maybe he smells an animal. Maybe. Dash eased the truck to the shoulder, angling the lights toward the curve. He had learned long ago that survival often began as an irritation, a sound out of place, a shadow that did not match. A dog refusing to be comfortable. He stepped out first. The storm swallowed him to the shoulders. Aubrey opened her door before he could stop her, and Wisp slipped past both of them. He landed in the snow awkwardly, but kept moving, cutting toward the tree line with desperate focus. "Wisp!" Aubrey called. The dog stopped, looked back, then took 3 more steps and looked back again. Dash cursed under his breath and grabbed a flashlight. "Stay near the truck?" Aubrey followed anyway. "Of course," he muttered. They moved toward the trees. Snow reached mid-calf in places. Dash swept the flashlight over branches, rocks, the buried edge of the road. Wisp nosed along the ground, then vanished behind a low rise where wind had sculpted the snow into a hard white lip. Dash saw the marks before he understood them. Faint tire tracks, almost gone. They curved off the road at the worst possible angle, the kind of slide that did not announce itself from the lane. A vehicle had left the road hours earlier, maybe more, then disappeared behind the snowbank and the trees. Dash's body shifted into work before thought could catch up. "Back to the truck," he said. "Now." This time Aubrey obeyed. There was no argument in her face, only the sudden widening of purpose. Dash repositioned the rescue rig, floodlights cutting across the slope. Under the glare, the shape emerged, a white home care vehicle lying tilted in a shallow drop beyond the trees, half buried, passenger side low, windshield crusted with ice. Aubrey's hand covered her mouth. "Summit Hearth!" Dash was already pulling gear. "Stay behind the cable line. Don't go downhill until I say." The next minutes became a language he understood. Anchor point, winch line, traction boards, angle, weight, snow depth, risk. The mountain could be cruel, but it was honest. Metal did what metal did. Ice held or broke. Cables sang under tension. Dash moved with calm speed, every motion stripped of waste. Wisp stood near the ridge, trembling again, not from cold alone. His eyes stayed fixed on the trapped vehicle. Dash clipped the line, tested the pull, then descended with a rescue pack and pry bar. Aubrey followed when he signaled, carrying her medical kit against her chest. The driver's door was jammed. Dash cleared snow from the frame and worked the bar carefully. No dramatic smashing, no wasted strength, just pressure, patience, and the stubborn mercy of leverage. The door gave with a metallic groan. Inside, a man slumped against the seatbelt. Late 30s, maybe. Face pale with cold. Short brown hair damp beneath a gray beanie. A Summit Hearth Care badge hung crooked from his jacket. His uniform was thin for the weather, the kind of clothing issued by people who thought field conditions meant walking from the parking lot to the lobby. Aubrey leaned in. "He's breathing." Dash supported the man's shoulder while Aubrey checked him with quick, practiced care. "Airway clear," she said. "Pulse present. He's very cold. We need him in the truck." Dash nodded. "On 3." Together they moved him with care, keeping him level, shielding him from the wind as much as possible. The man made a faint sound but did not wake. Wisp paced above them, whining, then suddenly went quiet as they carried the man up toward the rescue rig. Inside the cab, Aubrey took over with calm precision. She wrapped the man in thermal blankets, checked his breathing again, and spoke to him in a steady voice. "Sir, you're safe. I'm Aubrey Vale. You're in a rescue vehicle. Stay with us." Dash climbed in, shut the door against the storm, and turned the heater higher. The cab smelled of wet wool, cold metal, dog fur, and fear trying not to become panic. Aubrey searched the man's jacket for medical information. "I need a name." A small plastic badge slipped from the pocket and landed near Dash's boot. He looked down. For one moment, the storm seemed to stop outside the windshield. Jonah Vance. The letters sat there in plain black print, harmless as any name on any badge, but Dash felt them like a hand closing around his throat. Vance. Snow beat against the glass. The heater rattled. Aubrey was still working, speaking softly to the unconscious man. Wisp stood with his front paws on the seat, nose stretched toward Jonah's hand, making a low, broken sound that seemed too old for such a young dog. Aubrey glanced at Dash. Dash? He realized he had stopped moving. He bent, picked up the badge, and placed it on the dashboard with more care than plastic deserved. "You know him?" Aubrey asked. Dash looked at the unconscious man's face. Pale, worn, younger than Caleb would ever be now. Something around the mouth, the brow. Nothing definite, nothing fair. But grief did not need much evidence to rise. "No," Dash said. "It was not quite a lie, not yet." He put the truck in gear. "What matters is he's alive." Aubrey held Jonah steady as the rescue rig began to move. "We need to get him warm and monitored." "I know a place closer than the hospital," Dash said. "Old Lodge off Miller Road. Generator, radio, blankets." "Can you get us there?" Dash looked through the windshield. The road ahead was almost invisible. Behind him lay a dead van, a buried vehicle, and tracks the snow had nearly erased. Beside him sat a nurse who had risked her career for people in quiet houses. At his feet, a German shepherd with one folded ear watched over a man named Vance, as if the name itself had called him from beneath the storm. Dash tightened his hands on the wheel. The past had opened a door, but the living still needed him to drive. "Yes," he said. "Hold on." The yellow lights swept forward into the white, and the rescue rig climbed back toward the road, carrying Jonah Vance out of the snow, while Wisp stood guard at his side, like a small, trembling soldier who had finally found the person he had been trying to save. The old lodge off Miller Road had once been a place for summer hikers, honeymooning teachers, and families who believed mountains were best enjoyed with postcards and pancakes. That was before the bypass moved tourists elsewhere, before the owner retired to Arizona, before winter took over the building one draft at a time. Now the lodge served as an unofficial storm shelter whenever Briar Pass turned cruel. Its sign still hung over the porch, half-painted and stubborn. Pine Hollow Lodge. Snow had buried the lower half of the letters, so in the glow of Dash's headlights it read only Hollow, as if the mountain had decided to rename it honestly. Dash pulled the rescue rig beneath the sagging awning. The generator coughed somewhere behind the building, then settled into a rough, loyal growl. Ice clung to the porch rails. Yellow light spilled from the front windows, weak but alive. Aubrey had kept Jonah Vance wrapped and monitored through the drive, speaking to him in a low voice whenever his breathing shifted. "You're safe," she had repeated. "You're warm. Stay with us." Dash said nothing. He had driven through bad roads before. He had carried injured men. He had watched people fight their way back from the edge of sleep. But this was different in a way he did not yet have language for. The man in the back of the cab was not only a stranger. He was a door with Caleb's last name printed on it. And Dash had spent years refusing to open doors. Inside the lodge, the main room smelled of pine boards, old smoke, and coffee left too long on a warmer. A stone fireplace stood cold at one end, more decorative than useful, but 3 electric heaters hummed near the wall. Blankets were stacked on a bench. A radio sat on a side table beside a flashlight, a first aid kit, and a chipped mug full of pens. Lorna Bell had not lied. The place was ugly, drafty, and functional. Dash trusted it immediately. He carried Jonah in with Aubrey, guiding each step. Wisp limped close behind them, still wrapped loosely in the silver emergency blanket, one ear raised and the other folded, as though listening to two different worlds. The young German shepherd would not let Jonah out of sight. Twice Dash nearly tripped over him. "Dog," Dash muttered, "you are not helping." Wisp ignored him with the confidence of a creature already certain he outranked everyone. Aubrey pointed to a cot near the heater. "There." They lowered Jonah carefully. He stirred once, his face tightening, then sank back into a shallow, exhausted sleep. He was younger than Dash had first thought, perhaps 38. His cheeks were hollow from long shifts and poor rest. His thin summit hearth jacket looked absurdly inadequate for the conditions outside, like someone had issued him a promise instead of protection. Aubrey worked quickly, but without panic. She checked his temperature, his pulse, his breathing. She peeled off wet outer layers, replaced them with dry blankets, and tucked heat packs near, not against, his body, with the care of someone who understood that even warmth had to be offered gently. Dash stood at the edge of the room, holding Jonah's plastic badge. Jonah Vance. The letters should have meant nothing more than a name. A man's name, a worker's name, a patient's name for the night. But in Dash's hand, the badge seemed to weigh more than metal. Aubrey glanced at him while wrapping Jonah's hands. "Dash," he looked up. "You're standing like you heard a ghost." He slid the badge onto the table. "Just cold." Aubrey did not believe him. She had the mercy not to say so. Outside, the wind pressed against the lodge windows. The storm had lost some of its wildness, but not its intention. Snow brushed the glass in long white fingers. Somewhere in the building, a pipe knocked once, then again, like an old heart trying to remember rhythm. Wisp settled beneath Jonah's cot. Not near the heater, not near the door. Beneath the cot, where he could lift his head and watch the man's hand hanging over the edge of the blanket. He placed his chin on his paws, amber eyes fixed, as if guarding something no one else had yet understood. Aubrey noticed. "He knows him." Dash kept his voice even. "Could be the jacket. Could be the vehicle. Could be kindness." He did not answer. Aubrey pulled her notebook from her medical bag and sat at the old check-in desk. Its varnish had peeled at the corners. Someone had carved a heart into the wood years ago, the kind of tiny vandalism that survived longer than most vows. She turned pages, scanning names, times, handwritten notes. Dash watched her write. He disliked notebooks. He disliked records. He disliked the false comfort people found in putting ink around chaos. And yet Aubrey's notebook was different. It did not try to make life neat. It tried to remember who might be forgotten when life became inconvenient. Jonah made a sound. Aubrey was at his side instantly. "Jonah, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. His eyes opened halfway, unfocused and glassy with exhaustion. He stared past Aubrey, then at the ceiling, then toward the shape of Dash standing beside the heater. For a moment, no one moved. Jonah's lips parted. "Caleb?" Dash's body went still. Aubrey looked from Jonah to Dash. The generator hummed. Snow whispered against the windows. Wisp lifted his head. Jonah blinked, fighting to make sense of the room. His gaze sharpened by a painful inch. "No," he whispered. "Not Caleb." Dash could have stepped back. He could have pretended the name had not landed. He could have become the useful stranger again, the tow operator, the man with cables and gloves and no past anyone needed to discuss. But Jonah kept looking at him. His voice came out rough. "You were with him, weren't you?" Dash said nothing. Jonah swallowed, his throat working with effort. Dash Marrow. The name sounded strange in Jonah's mouth, not like a greeting, like an old photograph finding its voice. Aubrey lowered her hand from Jonah's wrist, but stayed close. Dash finally spoke. You need to rest." Jonah gave the smallest, weakest laugh. That sounds like something a man says when the truth walked in before he was ready. It was such a Caleb kind of sentence that Dash had to turn away. He walked to the lodge window and looked out at the snow. The reflection in the glass gave him back an older man than the one in the photograph inside his wallet. Gray at the temples, lines near the eyes, beard rough, shoulders still broad, but carrying years no training could lighten. Behind him, Jonah whispered, "He talked about you." Dash's hand closed around the dog tags beneath his shirt. Aubrey's voice was quiet. "Jonah, don't push yourself." "He kept a picture," Jonah breathed carefully between words. "In a box? Mom had it after. 5 of you. He said Dash was the one who could stay calm when the whole world started falling sideways." Dash shut his eyes. For years he had imagined Caleb's family speaking his name with bitterness. Perhaps they had. Perhaps they had earned the right. But this small, tired man repeating Caleb's faith in him from a cot in an old lodge, felt worse than blame. Blame could be carried like punishment. Trust, remembered after death, asked something harder. Dash turned back slowly. Caleb was the calm one. Jonah's mouth twitched. No, Caleb was the loud one who thought calm was what happened after coffee. Despite herself, Aubrey smiled. Dash did not, but something in his face changed. Not softened exactly, more like ice cracking too far beneath the surface to be seen. Jonah's eyes drifted closed, then opened again. "He said if he ever got old, he'd open a dog place." Dash's voice was low. "Retired wolves." Jonah looked at him then, fully. Aubrey looked too, but she did not interrupt. The room had become a chapel of half-said things. Dash remembered Caleb sitting on an ammo crate, chewing peppermint candy like it was medicine, describing a future that had never applied for permission. A ranch somewhere cold. Old working dogs. No loud people. No officers allowed unless they brought biscuits. Caleb had said he would name it Retired Wolves because every creature deserved to stop proving its teeth. Dash had laughed then. He had been young enough to laugh. Aubrey rose quietly and moved back to the desk, giving the men what privacy the room could offer. She opened Jonah's wet wallet, looking only for medical information, and found a folded photograph tucked behind an insurance card. She paused. Dash. He looked. The photograph was old, but protected in a clear sleeve. 2 brothers stood beside each other at a military family event. Caleb, younger and bright-faced in dress uniform, had one arm slung around Jonah, who looked barely out of high school then, awkward and proud, trying not to smile too widely. Behind them, an American flag hung against a gymnasium wall. Dash took the photograph with hands that could handle steel cable in a blizzard, but nearly failed around a piece of paper. "There," Jonah murmured. "Proof I was better looking once." Aubrey said, "You're severely underwarmed. We'll postpone vanity." Wisp rose from under the cot, sniffed the edge of the photo, then pressed his nose against Jonah's fingers. Jonah moved his hand with effort and touched the dog's head. "Hey, little man," he whispered. Wisp's tail shifted once against the floor. Aubrey noticed the familiarity in the gesture. "You know him." Jonah's eyes softened. He lived near the Summit lot. Nobody owned him, or everybody did, depending on who had leftover lunch. Dash looked at Wisp. He was under an abandoned truck. "Sounds like him." Jonah's voice was weak but warmer now. He liked hiding under vehicles. Engines stayed warm after shifts. I used to leave my jacket near the loading bay when it got bad. Aubrey frowned. Summit let a dog live in the lot? Jonah gave a tired breath. Summit didn't let anything live. People just did it quietly. The sentence hung there, simple and merciless. Aubrey looked down at her notebook again. Duty returned to her face, not cold duty, but the kind that hurt because it loved names more than systems. She flipped to the route list. "Jonah," she said gently, "you were assigned the High Ridge route tonight?" His expression changed. Fear, shame, exhaustion, and anger moved across his face like shadows passing over snow. "I had 12 stops." 12? Aubrey's voice sharpened. "In this weather?" 4 were supposed to be telecheck, he swallowed, but 2 don't have stable service. 1 doesn't answer unknown numbers. 1 needs an actual oxygen reading. Dash stood very still. Aubrey turned a page. "Summit marked several visits complete before you ever reached them." Jonah closed his eyes. That was answer enough. Dash spoke, rougher than intended. "Who told you to do that?" Jonah did not open his eyes. Dispatch language is never that plain. "What did they say?" "Close the route before midnight so the system doesn't flag missed coverage. Add notes after. Physical visits when weather allows. If I didn't, my hours would get reviewed. My reliability score would drop." He gave a dry, broken laugh. "Reliability? That's what they call it when you drive until you can't feel your hands." Aubrey's jaw tightened. "Grant said Summit confirmed coverage." "Summit confirms everything," Jonah whispered. "That's the job." Dash felt heat behind his ribs, quiet and dangerous. Not the clean heat of anger in a fight. Something heavier. He could see it now. The thin jacket, the overstuffed route, the road that should have been closed, the patients waiting in houses while a screen somewhere declared them cared for. He looked at Aubrey. "How many left on your list?" She did not answer immediately. That silence was enough. Jonah shifted, trying to sit up. Aubrey placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't?" "Alden," he said. Aubrey went still. Dash saw the name land on her face. "Jonah," she said. "Rest?" "He was on my last stretch." His breathing hitched with the effort. "I didn't make it. I tried. The curve iced over. I thought if I just got past the ridge." His voice thinned. "System probably says I made it." Aubrey checked her notes. Her finger stopped on a line. Dash did not ask what she saw. He already knew. The machine had written mercy where no mercy had arrived. For a long moment, the only sound was the generator and Wisp's soft breathing beneath the cot. Then Jonah whispered, "I fed him because Caleb would have." Dash looked at him. Jonah's eyes were open now, fixed on Wisp. "My brother used to bring home strays when we were kids. Dogs, cats, 1 very angry raccoon he insisted was misunderstood." Aubrey blinked. "A raccoon?" Mom disagreed with his assessment. Jonah's mouth curved faintly, then faded. "Caleb said anything cold and hungry deserved at least 1 person acting like the world hadn't voted against it." Dash's throat tightened. The room seemed suddenly too small for the past and the present to stand together. Caleb's laugh, Jonah's thin hand on Wisp's head, Aubrey's red medical bag on the desk, the storm outside. The name still unchecked in the notebook. Dash had spent years believing Caleb returned only in guilt. But here was Caleb returning differently. In a brother who had chosen care over comfort, in a nurse who refused to let paperwork become a grave, in a half-frozen German shepherd who remembered a jacket left by a tired man in a parking lot. Not accusation. Invitation. Aubrey closed her notebook with care. "Jonah, I need to know exactly which homes you didn't reach." His eyes flicked to Dash, then back to Aubrey. Fear passed through them. If he spoke, he might lose his job. If he stayed silent, someone else might be left waiting under a roof no one visited. Dash knew that border. He had lived on it. The line between self-preservation and the life of another person was never as clean as men in warm rooms pretended. Jonah whispered, "They'll say I failed the route." Aubrey said, "You slid off a mountain road trying to finish it." "They won't write it that way." Dash stepped closer. "No," he said. "They probably won't." Jonah looked up at him. Dash's voice stayed low, but it carried the weight of steel cable drawn tight. "So we write down what happened before they write it for you." Aubrey looked at Dash then. Something shifted between them, not trust fully, not yet, but recognition. She had seen him as a stubborn man with a truck and a hard mouth. Now she saw the outline of someone who knew what a report could do to the truth if no one stood beside it. Jonah stared at Dash for a long second. Then he nodded once. Aubrey moved closer with her pen ready. Jonah gave the names slowly. Road names, patient names, houses marked by landmarks because the maps were unreliable. The woman with the oxygen concentrator near the old birch line. The man with the woodpile too far from the door. The widow who always left her porch light on until someone came. Aubrey wrote every word. Dash stood by the window and watched the storm erase the road outside, understanding with a strange and painful clarity that snow was not the only thing that buried people. Sometimes systems did. Sometimes silence did. Sometimes a good man's shame did. When Jonah drifted back into sleep, Wisp remained beneath the cot. The shepherd placed his head on Jonah's boot, eyes open, guarding him from dreams, from cold, from whatever office had decided he was just another route to be closed. Aubrey capped her pen. "We still have patience out there," she said. Dash looked at her notebook, then at Jonah, then at Wisp. The past had found him in the storm wearing his dead friend's last name. But the living were still waiting. Dash reached under his shirt and touched the dog tags once. For the first time in years, the gesture did not feel like pressing a bruise. It felt like answering a call. "Then we don't waste the warmth," he said. Aubrey nodded, tired but steady. On the cot, Jonah slept under borrowed blankets. Beneath him, Wisp kept watch with one ear raised and one folded, a small guardian of all the forgotten things that had somehow survived the cold. And in that dim room, with the generator growling under the ice and the storm still circling the lodge, Dash Marrow began to understand that the dead did not always come back to punish the living. Sometimes they came back by sending someone home. By morning, the storm had lost its roar, but not its grip. Colorado lay beneath a bright, glassy silence. Snow covered the roofs, the parked trucks, the church steps, the pharmacy sign, and the narrow streets of town with such tenderness that a stranger might have mistaken the place for peaceful. Dash Marrow knew better. Snow could make almost anything look innocent. Pine Hollow Lodge had warmed through the night with the stubborn help of its generator. Jonah Vance slept in one of the back rooms, wrapped in dry blankets, his breathing steadier now. Wisp had refused every reasonable suggestion about where a dog should sleep and had taken position beside Jonah's door, chin on his paws, one ear raised like a sentry who had read the contract and found it lacking. Aubrey Vale had not slept much. She sat at the lodge's old check-in desk with her notebook open, the red medical bag on the floor beside her boots. Her blue scrubs were wrinkled from the night, her hair was tied back in a rough knot, and a faint line of exhaustion rested beneath each eye. Yet her hand moved carefully across the page, steady as a small flame in a drafty room. Dash stood nearby with a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rope. He did not complain. The coffee seemed to be doing its best. Aubrey turned the notebook toward him. "This is what I have." Dash looked at the pages. He expected the kind of medical notes that made his skull itch. Codes, numbers, acronyms, blocks of language designed to survive audits and bury meaning. Instead, Aubrey's handwriting ran in tight, practical lines. "Mrs. Price, heart medication delivered. Stovepipe drawing poorly. Firewood stack too far from back door. Says no one from Summit came Tuesday. Ruth Teller. Oxygen check needed. Often misses calls from unknown numbers. Porch light unreliable. Alden Rusk. Do not let him go to basement alone. Generator old. Needs inhaler refill. Check oxygen." The notes went on like that. Not elegant. Not official. Human. Dash touched the edge of the page with one rough finger. You write all this by hand? When the system drops out, paper still works. That sounds like something an old man would say. You drive a tow truck through blizzards and insult your coffee before sunrise. I wouldn't get too ambitious with the word old. He gave her a look. Aubrey almost smiled, but the smile did not last. The official records say several visits were completed last night. Mrs. Price says no one came before us. Jonah says he didn't finish the ridge route. That means either the system is wrong or someone is making it wrong on purpose. Dash studied the page again. He had spent years distrusting records because records had once told him he had done everything right. They had cleared him cleanly, professionally, permanently. And still Caleb had not come home. But Aubrey's notebook was not a shield against truth. It was a net. Thin, worn, imperfect, but held by someone who remembered names. "Where do we check?" he asked. Aubrey closed the notebook. "Hospital Annex. They keep a terminal there for community care coordination. If my access still works, I can compare Summit's timestamps against my route notes." Dash nodded toward the back room. "Jonah?" "Stable enough to rest. Lorna said she'll stop by and keep an eye on him until the clinic nurse gets through." At Jonah's door, Wisp lifted his head. Dash pointed at him. "You stay." Wisp blinked slowly. Aubrey picked up the red bag. "He understands you." "No, he's deciding whether I'm worth obeying." "That may take a while." Dash sighed and opened the door into the white morning. The hospital annex sat beside the main clinic, a low brick building with windows too small for the amount of fluorescent light inside. Someone had shoveled a narrow path from the parking lot. The snowbanks on either side rose like polished walls. Dash parked near the entrance, but left the truck facing out. Aubrey noticed. "You always do that?" "Yes." "Military habit? Mountain habit?" "That is a very convenient answer." "It's also true." Inside, the annex smelled of floor cleaner, paper, and overheated air. A clerk behind the front desk glanced up at Aubrey, then looked immediately uncomfortable, as if she had been warned that this particular nurse now carried weather indoors. Grant Pierce stepped from a side office before Aubrey could speak. He was in his early 50s, tall but slightly narrow, with neatly combed salt-and-pepper hair and a tie that looked as though it had never once forgiven a wrinkle. His glasses sat low on his nose. He adjusted them before saying anything, which told Dash the man had already prepared several sentences and regretted none of them. "Aubrey," Grant said, "I expected you to return the medication inventory last night." "I delivered medication to Mrs. Price," Aubrey replied. "And we found Jonah Vance off Ridge Spur Road." Grant's expression tightened by a fraction. "I was informed Mr. Vance had been transported to temporary shelter." Dash watched him carefully. Grant had not asked whether Jonah was all right. Aubrey noticed too. "He's alive," she said, "since you were about to ask." Grant blinked once. "Of course. I'm relieved." The sentence arrived late, overdressed, and cold. Aubrey held up her notebook. "I need to verify Summit's completed visits from last night." "That won't be possible right now." "Why?" "Because your actions are under review." Dash shifted his weight. Aubrey did not. "My actions kept Mrs. Price supplied and Jonah from staying in a snowbank." Grant lowered his voice. "This hospital cannot operate on personal judgment alone." "No," Aubrey said. "It should operate on patient need." "And patient need is tracked through established systems." "Then your established system is telling you a woman got a visit she didn't get, and a man completed a route while lying off the road in a disabled vehicle." A clerk somewhere behind the desk stopped typing. Grant's jaw set. "Summit Hearthcare is a certified contractor. They report electronically. Their records are auditable." Dash spoke for the first time. "Auditable doesn't mean honest." Grant looked at him as if noticing belatedly that the mountain had walked in wearing boots. "Mr. Marrow, this is an internal hospital matter." Dash gave him a mild look. "Then I'll stand here externally." Aubrey took one step toward the terminal station near the wall. "I'm checking the timestamps." Grant moved slightly, not blocking her with his body, but with his authority. It was an office kind of wall, invisible but practiced. "Aubrey," he said, "you are emotionally involved." She stared at him. "Grant, every good nurse is emotionally involved. That's not a defect. That's the only reason some people are still alive." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Grant's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and turned away. "Lydia is joining us." The name meant nothing to Dash, but Aubrey's face changed. A few minutes later, Lydia Strake arrived without seeming to hurry. She stepped through the annex door in a long wool coat, the color of clean stone, dark hair cut smoothly to her shoulders, leather gloves in one hand, tablet in the other. She brought no snow inside with her. Somehow, even the weather seemed to have been instructed not to inconvenience her. "Aubrey," Lydia said warmly. Too warmly. "I heard there was a difficult night." Aubrey's voice went flat. "Jonah Vance went off the road trying to complete a route your office marked completed." Lydia's expression softened into a polished sympathy. "We're all deeply concerned for Jonah's well-being." Dash wondered if she had practiced that in a mirror. "Then why was he assigned 12 stops in a storm?" Aubrey asked. Lydia tapped her tablet awake. "The number sounds dramatic without context. Several of those were flexible contact visits, not necessarily in-person care events." "One had no stable phone service," Aubrey said. "One needed oxygen checked. One was Alden Rusk." Lydia smiled faintly. "Our coordinators make route decisions based on available data. Your data says people were seen when they weren't. Our data says coverage was logged." Dash felt Aubrey's anger before he saw it, not loud, not wild, the quiet kind, the kind that did not waste heat. "What do you call a visit?" Aubrey asked. "When no one knocks?" Lydia looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "I call that a matter for review, not accusation." There it was, Dash thought. The trick. Wrap a broken thing in soft language until everyone hesitated to name it. Aubrey turned away from Lydia and went to the terminal. For a moment, her login worked. Dash watched over her shoulder while she pulled up the route records. Summit Hearth's completed visits appeared in clean rows: names, times, statuses, initials. The screen was neat enough to be believed by anyone who had never driven the road. Aubrey opened Mrs. Price's record. Completed. 8:42 p.m. Stable. Medication confirmed. "She was alone at 11:30, Aubrey said. Grant stepped closer. "A delayed entry could explain—" "No," Aubrey cut in. "The system says in-person confirmation. That requires presence." She opened another. Alden Rusk. Completed. 9:05 p.m. Condition stable. Oxygen adequate. Aubrey's hand stopped on the mouse. Dash saw the name and remembered Jonah's weak voice in the lodge. Alden, the old man Jonah had not reached. Lydia's polished calm did not break. "Aubrey, you are viewing those records without current authorization." "My access is active." "Not for long," Lydia said softly. The screen blinked. Aubrey frowned and clicked again. A gray message appeared. "Session expired. User permissions unavailable." The terminal returned to the login page. No one spoke. The silence was not dramatic. That made it worse. The truth had not been stolen by a masked figure in the night. It had been removed by a permission change, a clean little digital shrug, a door closing without making a sound. Aubrey sat very still. Dash felt something in him reach for an old response. Pressure, movement, confrontation. His hands curled once at his sides. Grant noticed. "Mr. Marrow, I'll have to ask you to remain calm." Dash turned his head slowly. Aubrey stood before he could speak. No. The word was not for Grant. It was for Dash. She placed one hand lightly against his forearm just for a second. Not fear, not pleading. A command given gently enough that he could accept it. "Patients don't need you to punch a table," she said. "They need someone to make sure the truth doesn't get buried under better paperwork." Dash looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at Grant. Then at Lydia. He inhaled once and let the heat drain back into discipline. Aubrey turned to Grant. "Are you formally suspending my access?" Grant adjusted his glasses. "Pending review, yes. You are also temporarily suspended from operating hospital vehicles or distributing medication inventory outside direct authorization." "I'm not handing over medication meant for patients who haven't been checked." "Aubrey." "Put it in writing." Grant's mouth thinned. "Excuse me?" "If you're stopping delivery, put it in writing, with the names. Mrs. Price, Ruth Teller, Alden Rusk. Put your name under theirs." For the first time, Grant looked uncertain. Lydia stepped in smoothly. "There's no need to personalize an operational pause." Aubrey looked at her. "That's exactly the problem." Dash did not smile, but he almost wanted to. They left the annex with no records downloaded, no apology, and more proof than they had entered with. Not the kind that printed neatly. The other kind. A reaction. A locked account. A contractor who knew which name mattered before Aubrey said too much. Outside, sunlight broke through a gap in the clouds and struck the snow so fiercely that the whole parking lot flashed white. Dash put on his sunglasses. "You were right about one thing." Aubrey looked tired enough to fold in half, but her voice stayed steady. "Only one?" "That system lies clean." She hugged her notebook against her chest. "Clean lies are the ones that last longest." They drove to Ellison Pharmacy next. The bell over the door rang as they entered, and warmth met them with the smell of menthol, paper bags, and cinnamon tea. Mara Ellison stood behind the counter, a compact woman in her mid-40s with auburn-brown hair clipped messily at the back of her head and reading glasses low on her nose. A white pharmacist's coat hung over a burgundy sweater. She looked like someone who could find a missing prescription, scold a mayor, and make soup for a stranger without changing shoes. She looked from Aubrey to Dash. "You two look like bad news wearing boots." Aubrey set her notebook on the counter. "I need to ask about Summit delivery confirmations." Mara's expression sharpened. "Finally?" Dash liked her immediately. Mara pulled a brown delivery ledger from beneath the counter. "I've had refill requests marked delivered before they left my shelf. When I called Summit, they told me it was a timing issue." "Was it?" Dash asked. Mara gave him a look over her glasses. "Do I look like I was born during a commercial break?" Aubrey leaned closer as Mara turned the ledger toward them. Names, dates, prescription numbers, notes in blue ink. Several entries were circled. "These were requested for backdated confirmation," Mara said. "I refused on 2. On 1, a coordinator told me the patient had verbally confirmed receipt. Patient called me 6 hours later, asking where her medication was." Aubrey's face tightened. Dash studied the ledger. Another notebook, another human record. While the official system polished its lies, the people who still cared had been leaving small stones along the path. They took photos of the relevant entries. Mara insisted on writing a statement in her own words. "Before someone with a nicer printer tells me what I meant." By early afternoon, Sheriff Nolan Briggs met them at Mrs. Price's cabin. Nolan was nearly 60, broad in the shoulders and softening at the middle, with a silver mustache and pale eyes made narrower by decades of mountain glare. He carried a steel coffee thermos in one hand and skepticism in the other. "I'm not saying you're wrong," he told Aubrey after hearing the first version. I'm saying bad record-keeping and criminal conduct. Wear similar coats until you get close." Mrs. Price sat in her armchair with a quilt over her knees, Wisp beside her like a visiting dignitary. Dash had brought the dog from the lodge because Wisp had made such a mournful sound at being left behind that even Lorna threatened to resign from canine emotional management. Mrs. Price scratched Wisp behind his folded ear. "Sheriff, I am 78, not decorative. I know when someone has visited my house." Nolan removed his hat. "I didn't mean—" "No, dear, people rarely do. That's why the world is full of nonsense." Dash coughed once into his fist. Aubrey hid a smile. Mrs. Price continued. "The record says a caregiver came at 8:42. At 8:42, I was watching the snow knock my porch wreath sideways and wondering whether Harold would have said something unhelpful about ladder safety. No one knocked, no one called, no one came." Nolan's face changed slowly, not dramatically, just enough. The thermos lowered in his hand. "Can you write that down?" he asked. Mrs. Price lifted her chin. "I can do better. I can say it twice if your pen is slow." That evening, back at the lodge, the pieces lay across the check-in desk. Aubrey's notebook, Mara's ledger photos, Mrs. Price's written statement, Jonah's route notes, and the memory of a screen that had gone blank the moment it began to matter. Jonah was awake but weak, sitting under blankets while Wisp pressed against his chair. His old Summit jacket hung over the back of another chair, drying near the heater. Wisp suddenly rose. He padded to the jacket, grabbed one sleeve gently in his teeth, and tugged. "Hey," Jonah murmured, "that's my only terrible jacket." Wisp tugged again, more insistent. Aubrey crouched. "What is it?" Dash reached for the jacket and felt something crinkle in the inside pocket. He pulled out a folded, damp piece of paper. Jonah frowned. "I forgot about that." Aubrey unfolded it carefully. It was a handwritten route list, not the official one, a working list. Names, road notes, risks, shortcuts, small reminders. Aubrey read silently until her finger reached the bottom. Her face lost color. Dash knew before she spoke. "Alden Rusk," she said. "Mark's stable last night." Jonah closed his eyes. "I didn't get there." Wisp stood beside them, amber eyes lifted, tail still, as if the dog understood only one thing, and that one thing was enough. Someone had been left waiting. Dash looked toward the windows. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, soft and bright under the porch light. Beautiful as a blessing, quiet as a cover. He picked up his gloves from the desk. Aubrey looked at him. "Dash?" He met her eyes. No one had to say what came next. Not yet. Not in full. The chapter had already spoken its last truth. Some numbers did not merely lie. Some numbers left people alone in the cold. The storm returned before evening, not with the rage it had worn the night before, but with something worse. Patience. It moved through the valley like an old wolf circling a herd, quiet enough to be underestimated, steady enough to win. Snow fell in thin, slanting sheets over Pine Hollow Lodge, over the hospital annex, over the pharmacy awning, over every roof that still dared to hold warmth. The town looked gentle beneath it. Dash Marrow had learned long ago that gentle things could still bury a man. On the check-in desk of the lodge, Alden Rusk's name sat at the bottom of Jonah's damp route list. Alden Rusk, Birch Line Road. Generator old. Oxygen check. Inhaler refill. Don't let him go to basement alone. The words were not dramatic. That made them worse. Aubrey Vale stared at the note as if it had grown teeth. Her red medical bag rested by her boots, packed again with the inhaler refill, a portable oxygen cylinder, a pulse oximeter, thermal packs, and the stubborn little notebook that had become more reliable than all the glowing screens in the county. Dash stood beside the window, watching snow erase the tire marks outside. Jonah sat under blankets near the heater, pale but awake. He looked younger without the Summit hearth jacket on, or perhaps simply less armored. Wisp stood beside him, one folded ear twitching toward the door, as if the dog understood that a name on paper could pull people back into the cold. "I should have made it there," Jonah said. Aubrey turned. "You were off the road and half frozen." "I knew Alden's generator was bad." "You also knew the mountain was bad," Dash said. Jonah looked at him, guilt moving across his face with an expression Dash recognized too well. It was the look of a man trying to turn survival into a debt. Dash hated it more on someone else. "You don't get to carry weather like it was a choice," Dash said. Jonah lowered his eyes. "Summit will say it was." "Then Summit can say it to me." Aubrey shot him a warning look. Dash lifted both hands slightly. "Figuratively." "Try to keep it that way." Wisp gave a quiet huff, which Aubrey took as agreement. Dash pointed toward Jonah. "You stay here. Lorna's coming back in 20 minutes. Sheriff Briggs knows we're checking on Alden. If the road shuts behind us, we radio before pushing farther." Aubrey nodded. "And if you say a road is impossible, I'll listen." Dash looked at her. She sighed. "I'll strongly consider listening." "Progress?" They left the lodge with Wisp between them. The shepherd had recovered enough strength to resist being carried, and enough pride to make the resistance personal. His yellow and black coat had dried in uneven tufts. The pale, wisp-shaped mark at his throat showed when he lifted his head into the snow. He still looked too thin, but something in him had changed since the night before. He no longer moved like a creature escaping the cold. He moved like one answering it. Dash opened the passenger door, and Wisp climbed into the back seat with solemn difficulty. Aubrey followed with her bag, settling in beside the oxygen cylinder. Dash checked the winch line, chains, shovel, traction boards, flashlight, spare blankets, and tow straps before getting behind the wheel. The rescue rig rolled away from the lodge, amber lights turning slowly in the gray-white dusk. For a while, no one spoke. The road to Birch Line was narrow, less traveled than the route to Mrs. Price's cabin, and worse maintained even in good weather. Snow had softened the ditches until they blended with the road, making every shoulder a potential trap. Pines crowded close, their branches heavy with fresh powder. Every so often, wind shook loose a white curtain from above, and the windshield vanished for one breath before the wipers clawed the world back into shape. Dash drove slowly, not cautiously. Carefully. There was a difference. Caution feared the road. Care listened to it. Aubrey checked the oxygen gauge, then the medication label, then her notebook. She had done each thing twice already. Dash noticed. "It won't change if you stare harder." "I know." "You staring for comfort or control?" Aubrey glanced at him. "Both? Honest?" "I try." The rig slid slightly on a bend. Dash corrected without drama, easing the wheel, letting the tires find bite again. Wisp spread his paws in the back seat and leaned with the motion, amber eyes fixed forward. Aubrey looked at the dog. "He thinks he's helping." "He's ballast with opinions." Wisp sneezed. Aubrey smiled faintly. Then the smile faded. "My mother used to say, if you want to know whether a town is kind, watch how it treats people who can't drive at night." Dash kept his eyes on the road. Aubrey did not usually volunteer pain. She carried it the way she carried the red bag, close, practical, and without asking anyone to admire the weight. "She was sick?" he asked. "For a long time." Aubrey rubbed a thumb along the strap of the bag. "Lung disease? Not dramatic most days, just exhausting. The kind where every staircase becomes a negotiation." Dash said nothing. Silence, when done right, could be a handrail. "We lived in a town smaller than this one," she continued. Everybody knew everybody, which meant everybody assumed somebody else had checked on her. The church thought the neighbor had gone. The neighbor thought the clinic had called. The clinic thought family was with her. She looked out at the snow. I was working a double shift in another county. By the time I got back, there were 7 messages on her phone asking if she needed anything. None of them were a knock. The heater hummed. The road climbed. Dash felt the sentence settle into the cab. None of them were a knock. It joined Mrs. Price's warning, Jonah's shame, Alden's name at the bottom of a list, a quiet army of doors no one had opened. "So you became the knock," he said. Aubrey looked at him. He regretted the words almost immediately. They sounded too soft in his mouth, too close to something he had not meant to offer. But Aubrey did not mock him. "Yes," she said. "I guess I did." They drove another half-mile before she asked, "What was Caleb like?" Dash's hands tightened, then loosened around the wheel. He could have refused. The old door was there inside him, heavy and familiar. He had closed it on chaplains, commanders, old teammates, strangers at bars, one therapist who had worn socks with tiny sailboats on them and asked good questions in a room that smelled like mint. But Jonah's face had opened something. Wisp's loyalty had widened it. Aubrey's quiet story had left no easy place for Dash to hide. "Loud," he said. Aubrey waited. Not careless. People made that mistake. He joked because everyone else was scared, and he knew fear spread fast. He ate peppermint candy before every mission, said it made him morally superior to coffee drinkers. Aubrey smiled. Bold claim. Caleb specialized in bold claims. The road narrowed. Dash slowed to avoid a drift pushing over from the right. "He had this idea," Dash continued, voice lower now, "that when we got old, we'd start a place for retired working dogs. Military, police, ranch dogs, search dogs. Any dog that had spent its life being useful and deserved to be useless in comfort." "Retired wolves," Aubrey said. Dash looked at her. "Jonah mentioned it," she explained. Dash nodded. "Caleb wanted a sign out front. Said it had to be ugly enough that rich people wouldn't stop by and try to make it tasteful." Aubrey laughed softly. Dash almost heard Caleb laughing with her. For a moment, the cab was not only cold and duty and fear. It held something absurdly alive. A dead man's old joke, a nurse with tired eyes smiling despite herself, a half-starved German shepherd sneezing judgment into the back seat. "Maybe he's still waiting," Aubrey said. Dash stared ahead. "For the dog place?" "For you to take in one wolf." Wisp sneezed again, louder this time, as if insulted by the category. Dash looked at him in the mirror. "If that is a wolf, it's the damp, underfed version with poor manners." Aubrey's laugh came out before she could stop it. It was small. It did not fix the storm. It did not save Alden. It did not absolve Dash, but it cracked the darkness in the cab just enough for warmth to get through. "There," Aubrey said, "you can make a joke that isn't defensive. Don't spread that around. I'll put it in the medical record. I'll deny everything." The rig climbed higher. Birch Line Road appeared as a gap between trees, almost invisible beneath new snow. Dash stopped at the turn and got out to check the grade on foot. The wind moved through the birches with a dry, whispering sound, their pale trunks standing close together like bones of an old forest temple. He returned to the cab. "We go slow. If we lose traction, I anchor and pull us up in sections." Aubrey swallowed. "That bad?" "That honest." He drove 10 yards, 20. The tires slipped. Dash stopped before the truck could slide sideways. He set the brake, climbed out, and began working with the calm rhythm of a man who had made an agreement with danger years ago. Anchor strap around a thick roadside post. Winch line secured. Traction boards under the tires. Back in the cab. Ease forward. Stop. Reset. Again. Every few yards became a small campaign. Aubrey watched him through the windshield, not with impatience now, but with respect. Dash did not conquer the road. He negotiated with it. He gave it no pride to punish. Inside the cab, Wisp's body leaned with each pull, eyes fixed toward the ridge above them. Aubrey checked the old address note again. Alden's place should be just past the birch stand. Dash breathed out through his nose. Should be? Maps hate his driveway. Of course they do. The final rise leveled under the trees. Then they saw the house. It sat back from the road in a shallow clearing, a small log cabin with a steep roof and a covered porch. Snow piled along the railings. Birch trees ringed it like pale guardians. No porch light burned, no window glowed. The chimney gave no smoke. A house without a light in winter had a silence of its own. Dash stopped the rig. Aubrey whispered, "Alden?" Wisp stood in the back seat. His body went rigid. Dash opened his door. "Stay close." This time Aubrey did not argue. They moved toward the cabin, boots sinking into fresh snow. Dash swept his flashlight across the porch, the windows, the side yard. Aubrey called Alden's name, her voice steady but rising at the edges. No answer. Dash tried the front door. Locked. Aubrey knocked hard. "Mr. Rusk, it's Aubrey Vale." From somewhere behind the house came a sound, not a voice, a knock, faint, slow. Then again. Wisp lunged. He slipped past Dash and ran along the side of the cabin, not toward the porch, not toward the windows, but around the back where snow had drifted high against the foundation. Dash and Aubrey followed, pushing through knee-deep powder. Behind the house, nearly buried beneath a shelf of wind-packed snow, was a cellar door. The knocking came again. Aubrey dropped to her knees and pressed her ear near the wood. "Mr. Rusk?" A muffled voice answered, too weak to make words. Dash was already digging. He used the shovel first, fast but controlled, clearing the packed snow from the cellar doors. The edges were frozen hard. He worked a pry bar into the seam, careful not to splinter the frame too badly. Aubrey kept calling through the door, giving Alden something to hold on to. "Stay with us, Mr. Rusk. We're here. We're opening it now." Dash leaned into the pry bar. The door groaned. Wisp barked once, sharp and urgent. Dash shifted his angle, tried again, and the frozen seal finally broke with a crack like a branch giving way. Cold, stale air breathed up from the dark. Alden Rusk lay near the bottom of the short cellar stairs, wrapped in an old coat, one hand still holding a small flashlight. He was a narrow old man with a white beard, weathered skin, and the stubborn bones of someone who had worked underground most of his life and did not appreciate being trapped beneath his own house. His eyes fluttered toward the light. "Well," he whispered, voice dry as paper. "Took you long enough." Aubrey gave a shaky laugh that was almost a sob. "Good to see you too, Mr. Rusk." Dash descended carefully. "Can you move?" "My pride's badly injured." "Anything else?" "Everything else is just old." Aubrey came down beside Dash and began checking him, her voice calm again, professional and warm. Alden had slipped while checking the generator switch in the cellar. Nothing obvious was severely injured, but the cold had taken strength from him. His breathing was strained. His portable oxygen upstairs had run low. His inhaler refill had never arrived. Dash helped lift him slowly, step by step, into the kitchen where the air was barely warmer than outside. Aubrey set the portable oxygen, checked his pulse, listened to his breathing, and guided him through slow inhales. Wisp entered behind them and immediately pressed himself against Alden's legs as if appointed by law. Alden's trembling hand settled on the shepherd's head. The old man looked down at the dog. "I knew somebody would come." Aubrey adjusted the oxygen flow. "You did?" "I left a complaint with heaven." Alden patted Wisp weakly. "Didn't know they'd send a four-legged preacher?" Dash, clearing space near the stove, glanced over. "He's not ordained." Wisp gave him a dignified look. Alden rasped. He has the eyebrows for it." Aubrey laughed softly, and this time there were tears in her eyes. Dash moved through the cabin with purpose. He restarted the generator after 2 stubborn tries, checked the venting, sealed a gap near the back door with an old towel, and brought in firewood from a stack half buried beside the porch. He found matches in a tin shaped like a trout and coaxed the stove back to life. Soon, weak golden light filled the room. Not much. Enough. Alden sat in an armchair near the stove, wrapped in blankets, oxygen steady, Wisp's head resting on his slipper. The old man's cabin smelled of dust, cedar, cold iron, and now, slowly, returning warmth. Photographs of mines and mountains hung crooked on the wall. A chipped mug sat beside a crossword puzzle. A pair of work gloves lay near the cellar door, exactly where Alden must have dropped them before going down. Aubrey checked her notes, then looked at the official printout she had copied before her access was locked. Alden Rusk, completed. Condition stable. She stared at the words, then at Alden's pale hands, then at the cellar door, still rimmed with broken ice. Dash saw her face and understood. The house itself had become witness. No argument from Lydia, no polished language from Grant, no gray box on a screen could change what stood before them. No porch light, no heat, no completed visit, no stable condition. Just an old man in a dark cellar, knocking until his strength nearly ran out. Dash stepped outside for a moment. Snow fell softly over the clearing. The rescue rig's amber lights turned among the birches, gold moving over white trunks like lanterns in some ancient procession. He could hear Aubrey inside, speaking gently to Alden. He could hear Wisp's faint huff whenever the old man shifted. Dash looked at his gloved hands. For years he had driven into storms as punishment. He had told himself hard nights were what he owed. Cold roads, dangerous calls, no comfort taken too easily, no life made soft when Caleb had lost the chance to grow old. But standing outside Alden Rusk's dark house, Dash felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not forgiveness, not peace. Usefulness without self-hatred. The difference was small, but it opened inside him like a match struck in a mine. This mission had no command center, no weapons, no foreign dust, no radio code that would haunt him later. It had a nurse with a red bag, an old man with a failing generator, a dog with one folded ear, and a road that only mattered because someone was waiting at the end of it. Dash touched the dog tags beneath his shirt. Then he went back inside. Aubrey looked up as he entered. Her eyes were tired, bright, and fierce. "We need to get him monitored overnight." Dash nodded. "I can make the road down." Alden lifted one finger. "I am not leaving my house because a little snow got theatrical." Wisp raised his head. Alden looked at the dog, then sighed. "Fine. I will consider medical advice from the preacher." Aubrey smiled and began packing what she needed. Dash moved to help her, but paused at the doorway to the cellar. The broken snow still clung to the threshold, cold and white and defeated. He looked back at Alden, alive in the yellow light, then at Aubrey, steady beside him, then at Wisp, guarding the old man's feet as if the world had finally given him a post worth keeping. Dash understood with quiet certainty that they had not simply found a patient, they had found proof. And somewhere far beyond the snowy birches, in a warm office or a clean report, a number had called this man safe. The number had lied. The knock had not. Alden Rusk came down from Birchline Road wrapped in 3 blankets and a fierce resentment toward being rescued. He sat in the back of Dash's recovery rig like an old king forced to leave his mountain castle, oxygen tubing resting beneath his nose, one hand buried in Wisp's thick yellow and black fur. The German shepherd had taken the assignment seriously. He leaned against Alden's boots with the solemnity of a cathedral statue and occasionally gave Dash a look that seemed to say the driver was moving too fast, too slow, or generally failing to meet canine medical transport standards. Aubrey Vale sat beside Alden, checking his breathing, asking short questions, and pretending not to notice whenever the old man tried to sound less tired than he was. "I've had worse mornings," Alden rasped. "It's not morning yet," Aubrey said. "Then I've had worse, whatever this is." Dash glanced in the rearview mirror. "You always this cooperative?" Alden looked at him over the blanket. "Son, I spent 34 years in mines. Cooperation is what men ask for when they don't want to admit they need help lifting something." Wisp sneezed. Alden patted his head. "See? The preacher agrees." By the time they reached town, the sky had begun to brighten, not with warmth, but with that pale winter light that made the world look carved from glass. Snowbanks glowed blue along the roads. The church steeple rose through the white morning. Smoke curled from chimneys in careful threads. Sheriff Nolan Briggs met them outside the clinic, thermos in one hand, notebook in the other. His silver mustache had gathered frost at the edges, and his eyes, usually narrowed with skepticism, looked more awake than they had the day before. He watched Alden being helped inside. Then he turned to Aubrey. "You were right to go." Aubrey looked too tired to enjoy the sentence. "I wish being right had gotten there sooner." Nolan gave a slow nod. "That's why we write down the part that can still matter." He was still cautious. Dash could see that. Nolan Briggs was not a man who leapt because someone pointed at smoke. He measured the wind, checked for flame, and asked who owned the matches. But the caution had changed shape. Yesterday it had been a locked gate. Now it was a bridge, narrow but passable. Inside the clinic, Alden was placed under proper observation. He complained about the blanket pattern, the temperature of the room, and the moral weakness of decaf coffee. Aubrey checked in with the nurse on duty, handed over the details, and made sure Alden's medication and oxygen were documented. Dash stood back. He had learned not to crowd rooms where professionals knew what they were doing. That was one of the first lessons of survival. A man did not become useful by standing in the way with broad shoulders and good intentions. Wisp disagreed. The dog followed Alden's gurney until Aubrey caught him by the collar and whispered, "Not there, preacher." Wisp gave her a wounded look. Dash said, "He's filing a complaint. He can take a number." Nolan cleared his throat. "Mara opened early. Said if you folks had sense, you'd come before half the town starts needing cough syrup and gossip." "Mara said that?" Aubrey asked. She used different words, fewer of them polite. Ellison Pharmacy stood on the corner of Main and Juniper, its windows glowing amber against the snow. The sign above the door had lost a little paint, but the bell still rang cleanly when they entered. Warmth greeted them first, then the smell of menthol, paper bags, cinnamon tea, and the faint dust of cardboard boxes. Shelves lined the narrow shop like quiet witnesses. Cough drops, bandages, vitamins, reading glasses, old-fashioned candies no one admitted buying for themselves. Mara Ellison stood behind the counter in her white pharmacist's coat, auburn brown hair clipped messily at the back of her head, reading glasses perched low on her nose. Beneath the coat she wore a burgundy sweater that made the whole pharmacy feel warmer by association. She looked at Alden's empty place in their group, then at Aubrey's face. "He made it?" Aubrey nodded. "He's being monitored." Mara let out a breath she had clearly been holding for longer than pride aloud. "Good. He owes me $6 and an apology for calling my blood pressure machine a theatrical liar." Dash looked toward Aubrey. "Is everyone in this town armed with insults?" "It's how we maintain circulation." Mara pulled a brown ledger from beneath the counter and set it down with the reverence of a priest laying a heavy book on an altar. "Let's talk about the kind of miracle where medication gets marked delivered while still sitting on my shelf." Nolan opened his notebook. Dash leaned one shoulder against a display of heating pads and stayed quiet. This was not his terrain. Prescription numbers, delivery logs, refill confirmations, patient signatures, those belonged to Aubrey and Mara. Dash had spent a lifetime understanding maps, angles, timing, human stress under pressure. He knew enough to know when another person held the right weapon for the room. Mara turned pages. Her handwriting was sharp, blue, and deeply unimpressed. "These three," she said, tapping the paper. "Requested by Summit for delivery confirmation on dates when no pickup occurred." This one was marked, "Patient confirmed sufficient supply." "Patient called me that evening asking why her inhaler wasn't ready." This one had a note. "No direct contact required," except the patient was on a direct checklist. Aubrey took photographs with her phone, careful to include dates and prescription numbers. Nolan asked, "Can you make a statement?" Mara lifted her glasses. "Sheriff, I've been waiting 3 months for someone to ask me that without yawning." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. She wrote her statement at the counter, slowly, clearly, with the bell above the door silent and the town outside shining too brightly for what was being uncovered inside. Dash watched the pharmacy lights fall over the ledger pages. In war, evidence had often been harsh: coordinates, surveillance, wreckage, recordings. Here, it was quieter. A circled refill, a note in blue ink. A pharmacist who remembered what shelf of medicine had never left. Small truths, but small truths, gathered properly, could become a road. Jonah arrived near mid-morning with Lorna Bell driving him in her old Subaru and scolding him for apologizing every time the tires bumped. He moved slowly, wrapped in a borrowed coat, face pale but clearer. Wisp went to him at once, pressing his head against Jonah's thigh. Jonah bent carefully and touched the folded ear. "Hey, little man?" Wisp leaned harder, as if making sure gravity remembered them both. Lorna stood near the door, arms crossed. She was a wiry woman in her 60s with short gray hair, a radio clipped to her belt, and the expression of someone who had not been properly surprised since 1987. "I told him he could either come answer questions or stay at the lodge and listen to me describe every mistake my ex-husband ever made with a snowblower." "He chose justice?" Jonah managed a weak smile. "It was close." They set him in a chair near the consultation counter. Mara brought tea. Jonah wrapped both hands around the cup, not drinking at first, just borrowing its warmth. Nolan sat across from him. His voice gentled. "Jonah, I need to ask about Summit Hearth's routing procedures. Not what they look like in the handbook. What they look like at 10 p.m. in weather like this." Jonah stared into the tea. For a few seconds, Dash thought he might close down. Fear had a way of folding people inward. Dash knew that shape. He had seen it in witnesses, soldiers, himself. Then Aubrey placed her notebook on the counter, open to Alden's line. Jonah looked at it. Alden's name did what no speech could. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "There are messages," he said. No one moved too quickly. Mara stepped away to give space. Nolan leaned forward but did not grab the phone. Aubrey stayed beside Jonah, not over him. Dash watched the door, the windows, the street beyond, because some habits did not ask permission before returning. Jonah opened a thread from a Summit coordinator. The messages were not dramatic. That was their cruelty. Close route before midnight to prevent coverage flag. Add notes after weather clears. Telecheck acceptable if in-person completion delayed. Reliability score impacted by unresolved visits. Reminder, contract efficiency review this month. Nolan read silently, then once aloud for the record. Aubrey's face did not change much, only her hand tightened on the notebook. Dash felt anger move through him like a dark animal, but this time he did not reach for it. Aubrey had been right. Patients did not need a table broken. They needed a line of proof unbroken. Jonah's voice shook. "They never wrote 'fake it.' Nobody says that. They say close the route, protect coverage, resolve the flag, maintain reliability, and after a while you understand what they mean. Mara set down her tea too hard. That is language invented by people who have never waited for oxygen in a dark house, Lorna muttered, or changed a tire without calling it mobility optimization. Even Nolan's mouth twitched. For a moment, humor passed through the pharmacy, thin but real. Not disrespect, survival. The kind of small laughter people use when the truth is too ugly to hold bare-handed. Dash looked at Jonah. "You didn't make the system." "No," Jonah said, "but I worked inside it." "So did Aubrey. Difference is what you do when you see the teeth." Jonah looked at him, and Dash realized he was not only talking to Caleb's brother, he was talking to himself. By noon, the pharmacy counter had turned into a command table. Aubrey laid out her notebook entries. Mara added prescription records. Nolan requested access to traffic camera logs from the gas station near Ridge Spur Road and the security camera outside the pharmacy. Lorna printed weather closure notices from dispatch. Jonah marked his actual route on a county map. Dash took the map. This, at least, was his language. He spread it across the counter, weighed the corners with a tape dispenser, a jar of peppermint sticks, Mara's stapler, and Wisp's paw, until Aubrey removed the paw and replaced it with a bottle of hand sanitizer. "Contribute less," she told the dog. Wisp looked betrayed. Dash marked Mrs. Price's cabin, then Jonah's slide-off point, then Alden Rusk's place near Birchline. Then the other home Summit had listed as completed. He used a black pen for roads open during the storm and red for roads closed or unsafe. He wrote times from Summit's records beside each location. Then he drew the lines. The lie became visible, not emotional, not arguable, not dependent on memory alone. Visible. "No vehicle starts here," Dash said, tapping the Summit lot, reaches Mrs. Price at 8:42, cuts across Ridge Spur to the tellers by 8:58, returns toward Birchline by 9:05, then shows up near the Old Mill Road by 9:17. Not in last night's weather, not with closures here and here, not unless Summit issued helicopters and forgot to mention it. Mara leaned over the map. They can barely issue gloves. Nolan looked at the lines for a long time. His skepticism did not vanish. It matured into purpose. "All right," he said, "this is enough for an official report. Not a conviction, not a parade, but enough to move." Aubrey closed her eyes for 1 second. Dash saw the relief pass through her, then the fear right behind it. Proof was not safety. Sometimes proof was the moment trouble learned your name. That afternoon, they brought the compiled evidence to the hospital. Lydia Strake was already there. She stood in the conference room beside Grant Pierce, tablet held against her coat like a ceremonial shield. Her hair was smooth, her expression composed, her voice almost kind when she said, "We are deeply sorry for any distress patients may feel." Alden sat in a wheelchair near the table, wrapped in a blanket, looking personally offended by the phrase. "Distress?" he repeated. "I was in a cellar knocking on a frozen door." Lydia turned toward him with professional softness. "Mr. Rusk, Summit Hearth takes your experience very seriously." "My experience took me seriously, too. That's why it nearly kept me." Grant cleared his throat. "We're all victims of inaccurate data here." Aubrey looked at him. "No, Grant. Patients are victims. Jonah was pressured. Mara was ignored. I sent warnings." Grant adjusted his glasses. "I don't recall—" Aubrey set printed copies on the table. 3 emails, she said. 2 incident notes, 1 request for a rural route review, all marked non-urgent complaint by operations. Grant's face changed. "Not much. Enough?" There are things a man does not know because no one tells him, and there are things he does not know because knowing would require him to act. Dash watched Grant meet the second kind of ignorance. Lydia's smile cooled by 1 degree. "These matters require context." Nolan placed his report beside Aubrey's papers. "That's what we're building." Mara added her written statement. Jonah added copies of the messages. Dash placed the marked map on the table last. No speech, no thunder, just lines, times, roads, and names. Lydia looked at the map. For the first time, her stillness looked less like control and more like calculation. By late afternoon, Nolan submitted the packet through the fraud reporting line connected to federal health insurance oversight. Aubrey gave a recorded statement. Jonah gave one too, voice unsteady but clear. Mara submitted prescription records. Dash provided the route analysis, careful to stick to distances, closures, and times. Then came the waiting. It lasted only 2 hours, but it felt longer than the storm. They were back at the lodge when Aubrey's phone rang. She answered on speaker. "This is Renee Calder," said a woman's voice. Calm, precise, not warm, but not cold either. "I'm an investigator reviewing the report submitted regarding Summit Healthcare's mountain coverage claims." Aubrey straightened. "This is Aubrey Vale." "I've received your packet. I'm issuing a preservation request for relevant records and requesting formal statements from the named parties. I need exact timelines, independent corroboration, and unaltered copies of communications." Nolan nodded, though Renee could not see him. Renee continued, "I am not promising an outcome tonight, but if the evidence holds, emergency suspension of the High Ridge contract may be considered while the matter is reviewed." No one cheered. The room did not know how, but something shifted all the same, like a lock turning after years of rust. Dash looked at Aubrey. She was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright. Jonah had one hand on Wisp's head. Mara stood with her arms folded, blinking hard behind her glasses. Nolan took off his hat and looked down at it as if it had suddenly become important. Aubrey said, "Thank you." Renee replied, "Thank me when the timeline survives scrutiny." Then the call ended. That night, after statements and copies and quiet phone calls, Dash sat on the porch of Pine Hollow Lodge. The storm had moved on. Snow still fell lightly, but now it came without anger. The porch light turned each flake gold for one brief second before letting it fall into the dark. Wisp lay beside him, head resting on Dash's knee. The dog wore no red scarf yet, no symbol, no proof of belonging. Just his uneven ears, his thin body growing warmer, and the strange certainty with which he had chosen to stay near broken people. Dash held his phone. Caleb's parents were still in his contacts. He had saved the number years ago. He had stared at it on birthdays, holidays, nights when the walls came too close. He had imagined calling to apologize and imagined every possible silence that might follow. He had never imagined calling to tell them Jonah had helped save people. That felt different, harder somehow. He did not press the call button. Not yet. Instead, he looked down at Wisp. Caleb would laugh himself sick if he saw this. Wisp lifted one amber eye. "Half my life," Dash said softly, "and I'm just now learning to ask for help from a nurse, a sheriff, a pharmacist, a half-frozen caregiver, and a dog who thinks he's clergy." Wisp sighed. It was a long, patient, disappointed sigh. Dash nodded. "Yeah, that's fair." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and rested his hand on the dog's head. Inside the lodge, Aubrey was still organizing statements. Jonah was still finding the courage to keep speaking. Somewhere down the road, Alden Rusk was alive enough to complain. And somewhere beyond the valley, a woman named Renee Calder had opened a file that might finally make the clean numbers answer to the messy truth. Dash looked out at the snow. For the first time in years, the night did not feel like punishment. It felt like a door waiting for him to knock. A few days after the storm, the mountain roads still carried scars. Plow banks rose along the shoulders like white walls. Pine branches hung low under new weight. Roofs glittered beneath the hard Colorado sun, and every porch step in town held the same half-melted evidence of winter's persistence. Boot prints, salt, slush, and the stubborn hope that tomorrow might be easier. Summit Hearth Care's High Ridge contract was suspended before noon on Wednesday. The announcement did not arrive with thunder. No one burst through a door. No villain collapsed in a public square. There was only an email, a formal notice, a sequence of careful words from Federal Oversight and Hospital Administration, temporary suspension pending review, preservation of relevant records required, patient welfare reassessments initiated. It sounded small, almost bloodless, but in the houses above Briar Pass it sounded like a knock. For the first time in months, the names on the ridge route were no longer clean rows in a contractor's system. They became Mrs. Price with her lavender robe and sharp eyes, Alden Rusk with his miner's hands and offended dignity, Ruth Teller with the unreliable porch light. Men and women in cabins, trailers, old farmhouses, and weather-beaten cottages, each one waiting not for a completed field on a screen, but for a human voice at the door. Dash Marrow read the notice standing in the doorway of Pine Hollow Lodge, coffee in one hand, Wisp leaning against his boot as if the dog had personally filed the complaint. Aubrey Vale stood beside him, her red medical bag hanging from one shoulder. She looked exhausted in the way only a person looks after surviving a crisis and then being asked to attend meetings about it. Her blue scrubs were clean now, her hair tied back neatly, but the tired brightness in her eyes had not faded. "Well," Dash said, scanning the notice, "that is the most boring way I've ever seen a door open." Aubrey took the paper from him. "Boring doors stay open longer." Wisp sneezed, possibly in legal agreement. The hospital moved quickly after that, not because it suddenly grew a conscience overnight, but because evidence had a way of making conscience more convenient. A temporary winter response team was formed for the High Ridge patients. The first version had too many signatures, 3 unnecessary approval steps, and a proposed vehicle that Aubrey described, politely, as a decorative sled with headlights. The second version worked better. Aubrey made sure of it. She was reinstated before the end of the week, but she did not return as a grateful employee rescued from misunderstanding. She walked into the hospital conference room with her notebook, her red bag, and the calm fury of a woman who had counted too many unanswered doors. "I'll go back," she told Grant Pierce and the interim medical director, under written conditions. Grant sat at the long table with his tie looser than usual. The last few days had carved lines into his face that had not been there before. He no longer looked polished. He looked like a man discovering that a smooth system could still leave fingerprints. "What conditions?" he asked. "Backup routes, weather-rated vehicles, direct nurse escalation when a patient is unreachable. No contractor can mark a high-risk patient complete without a verifiable contact or documented in-person attempt. And field staff warnings don't get buried as non-urgent complaints because they make the dashboard ugly." The interim director looked uncomfortable. Grant looked at his hands. A few days earlier, he might have reached for phrases like liability exposure or operational limitations. Now he had spent 2 mornings listening to patients describe what it felt like to wait in dark houses while reports claimed they were stable. Mrs. Price had spoken for 11 minutes without repeating herself once. Alden Rusk had spoken for 4 minutes and somehow made the word cellar sound like an indictment. Grant cleared his throat. "We can draft a revised protocol." Aubrey did not soften. "No, we can implement one." Dash, who had been invited only because his rote analysis had become part of the file, leaned against the back wall and said nothing. He had learned there were rooms where silence could help more than force. This was Aubrey's ground. She did not need him to fight for her. She needed the room to hear her without him standing in front. Across town, Lydia Strake gave her own statement with the elegance of a person placing flowers on ice. She did not shout. She did not confess. She did not look frightened enough to satisfy anyone who wanted a simple ending. Summit Hearth, she explained, regretted any distress experienced by patients. Summit Hearth was cooperating fully. Summit Hearth valued rural communities. Summit Hearth would review communication practices and route optimization language. Renee Calder's reply, relayed later through Sheriff Briggs, was reportedly brief. Good. Preserve everything. That was the thing about clean language. Once people stopped bowing to it, it had fewer places to hide. The investigation did not finish in a day. It would take time. Records had to be compared. Billing claims had to be checked. Messages had to be authenticated. Patients had to be interviewed. No one was marched away in disgrace while music swelled over the snow. The truth worked more like winter sunlight. Slow, cold, relentless. It entered cracks first. Jonah Vance gave his full statement 2 days after Alden came down from Birch Line. He sat at Mara Ellison's pharmacy counter with a cup of tea between his hands, still pale, still moving carefully, but no longer speaking, as if every word might cost him the right to exist. "I kept thinking I could fix it by trying harder," he said. "One more stop, one more mile, one more note after midnight. I thought if I cared enough, I could make a bad route safe." Aubrey stood beside him. Dash stood near the window, Wisp at his side. Jonah looked down at the dog. But kindness can't patch a system built to tear. Mara, behind the counter, stopped pretending to organize cough drops. Sheriff Briggs wrote the sentence down. Later, outside the pharmacy, Aubrey asked Jonah if he would consider joining the new community winter response team when he was well enough. Not Summit, not the old machine with its soft words and sharp teeth. A local team, smaller, messier. Human enough to know when a porch light mattered. Jonah did not answer right away. Fear came first. It still knew the way. Then Wisp, who had been sitting between the two men, rose and pressed his head into Jonah's knee. Jonah scratched behind the folded ear. The dog accepted this tribute with the gravity of a monarch receiving tribute from a loyal village. Jonah looked toward Dash. Dash said nothing. He only nodded once. Jonah exhaled. "I'll try," Aubrey smiled. "That counts." "No," Jonah said, and something steadier entered his voice. "I'll do it." Wisp's future became the most ridiculous civic issue Briar Pass had faced in years. Jonah had fed him first. Aubrey had named him. Mrs. Price announced she had spiritual visitation rights because Wisp had entered her cabin during a medical delivery and behaved with nearly professional solemnity. Alden insisted the dog was a four-legged preacher and therefore belonged to the entire congregation of people who had made poor choices involving stairs. Mara argued that whoever took him should buy better food than whatever Dash considered acceptable, because tow truck men think jerky is a food group. Dash stayed out of the debate. He told himself he did not need a dog. Wisp did not consult him. On Saturday afternoon, Mrs. Price arrived at the lodge with a small red knitted scarf folded in her hands. She had made it from leftover yarn, though she claimed it was not made for Wisp specifically, because she did not want the dog becoming vain. Wisp sat before her, one ear upright, one ear folded, eyes solemn. Mrs. Price tied the scarf around his neck. "There," she said, "a proper gentleman." Wisp stared at the scarf with visible betrayal. Alden, seated nearby with a blanket over his knees, nodded approvingly. "Looks like a bishop." "He looks like a wet broom wearing a ribbon," Dash said. Wisp lifted his chin and walked across the room with exaggerated dignity, immediately proving he preferred the bishop theory. Everyone laughed. The sound filled the old lodge differently than the generator had. It did not drive out every shadow. It simply gave them less room. Then came the moment no one had planned. Jonah sat on one side of the room, hand resting on his knee. Dash stood near the window, arms crossed, trying to look like a man unaffected by knitted accessories. Wisp walked to Jonah first. He pressed his head under Jonah's palm, accepted the touch, and stood there long enough for the room to grow quiet. Then he turned. He crossed to Dash, circled once, and lay down with his chin across Dash's boot. Dash looked down. The dog looked up. A simple exchange. No drama, no grand music. Just a half-starved shepherd who had survived beneath a truck, choosing the man who had spent years living beneath his own grief. Jonah smiled. He found the person who needs him more. Dash's throat tightened. That's not how dog ownership works. Mrs. Price folded her hands. Men always say that right before buying bowls. Mara added, and better food. Aubrey looked at Dash with quiet amusement. And possibly a brush. Wisp thumped his tail once against the floor, sealing the arrangement with legal authority. Dash did not take Wisp home as a reward. He knew better than that. Living creatures were not medals pinned to a healed wound. Wisp came with needs, habits, opinions, and an alarming interest in Dash's gloves. He came with nightmares sometimes, waking from sleep with a low whine until Dash placed one hand on his back. He came with muddy paws, suspicious sneezes, and a refusal to sleep anywhere except near the door. But every morning, Wisp made Dash step outside. Every evening, he made the house feel less like a place Dash stored his body between storms. The dog did not cure him. He called him back. On Sunday morning, Dash sat alone in his kitchen while pale sun crossed the table. Wisp lay by the door, red scarf discarded beside him, because apparently clergy required breaks from formal dress. Dash held his phone in one hand. Caleb's parents were still there in his contacts. For years, their number had been a locked room. He had imagined calling to apologize. He had imagined begging forgiveness. He had imagined silence, anger, kindness, each possibility too heavy to lift. This time, he did not call for himself. He called for Jonah. The line rang 3 times. A woman answered, older than the voice in Dash's memory, but still carrying warmth beneath the caution. "Hello?" Dash closed his eyes. "Mrs. Vance," he said. "This is Dash Marrow." There was no sound on the other end, not at first. Dash opened his eyes and looked at Wisp. The dog had lifted his head. Dash had rehearsed apologies for years. They were old, worn things, polished by guilt until they had lost meaning. He did not use them. "I'm calling about Jonah," he said. "He's safe. He did something brave during the storm. He helped save people who had been forgotten." A breath caught on the other end. Dash's voice roughened. Caleb would be proud of him. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt like a door opening in a house long closed for winter. Then Mrs. Vance began to cry. Not loudly, not accusingly. It was a soft, broken sound, the kind made by someone who had carried 2 sons in different kinds of fear and had just been told one of them had carried the other's light forward. Dash bowed his head. "I should have called sooner," he said. Mrs. Vance breathed shakily. "Yes." The word landed clean. Not cruel. True. Dash accepted it. Then she said, "But I'm glad you called now." Wisp rose, crossed the kitchen, and pressed against Dash's leg. Dash placed his hand on the dog's head and stayed on the line. They did not fix everything in that call. No single conversation could melt a winter that had lasted years. They spoke of Caleb a little, Jonah more. Weather briefly, because grief sometimes needed ordinary things to stand beside it. When Dash hung up, his guilt was still there, but it no longer stood alone. The next morning, Colorado shone. Snow still covered the roofs and pines, but the road through town had been cleared. Dash's yellow recovery rig waited near the clinic, headlights bright in the clean air. Beside it stood the new winter response vehicle, heavier tires, better chains, emergency lights, and enough practical ugliness to earn Dash's approval. Aubrey checked the red medical bag before loading it into the back. Jonah, bundled in a warmer coat without the Summit logo, helped secure an oxygen cylinder. He moved slowly, but he moved like a man returning to himself. Mara stood outside the pharmacy with a paper cup of coffee, waving at everyone with the weary pride of a woman whose ledger had helped shake a machine. Sheriff Briggs spoke with Alden Rusk near the curb, both men holding coffee as if it were an official civic tool. Mrs. Price adjusted Wisp's red scarf, while the German shepherd endured it with the noble suffering of a saint in poor tailoring. Dash watched them all. He felt the old ache in him, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a chain dragging behind him. It was a scar beneath warm clothing. Present, permanent, but not in command. The radio in his truck crackled. "Dash!" Lorna Bell's voice came through. "You free?" Dash picked up the mic. "Define free." "Pickup slid near mile marker 12. No injuries reported. Driver scared enough to become religious." Dash looked at Aubrey as she climbed into the response vehicle. Jonah shut the rear door. Wisp leaned against Dash's leg, scarf bright against his yellow and black coat, one ear folded with heroic disobedience. For years, Dash had answered calls as if walking into punishment. This time, he rested his hand on Wisp's head and looked at the cleared road ahead. Snow shone on the mountains like a blessing no one had earned and everyone was allowed to receive. He pressed the radio button. "I'm coming," Dash said. And when the recovery rig rolled forward, Wisp riding beside him, the headlights did not cut through a storm. They lit the way home. Sometimes the miracle is not a thunderbolt from the sky. Sometimes it is a nurse who refuses to turn back, an old man who keeps knocking in the dark, a dog who remembers kindness, and a broken-hearted man who finally answers the call again. Dash's story reminds us that healing does not always begin when the pain disappears. Sometimes it begins when we stop standing alone inside it. Grace often arrives quietly, through ordinary hands, loyal paws, and one small act of courage at the right time. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who in your life has been a light during a storm. And if you want more stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances, please subscribe to True Seal Dog Stories. May you be blessed with peace, and may someone always knock when your house feels dark.